She walked into the most exclusive gala in New York wearing gold silk and a billionaire CEO on her arm. The society pages called her the winner, the young mistress who had finally dethroned the forgotten wife. But 3 hours later, she'd be escorted out by security with mascara-streaked cheeks and FBI agents waiting at her door. Because the wife everyone thought was powerless, she owned everything, and she was about to prove it in the most devastating public takedown ever witnessed at a high society event. This is the true story of ambition, betrayal, and what happens when you mistake silence for weakness. Hit that like button, drop your prediction in the comments, and subscribe because you won't believe what happens next. Brittany Shaw stood in front of her bathroom mirror in a studio apartment in Astoria, Queens, applying $15 mascara with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. In 6 hours, she would walk into the Metropolitan Museum of Art on the arm of Grant Hawthorne, billionaire CEO of Hawthorne Technologies. In 6 hours, her life would finally begin. She had grown up in Lima, Ohio, where her father managed a tire shop and her mother worked the register at Walmart. Brittany had been the smart one, the one who got out. Full scholarship to Ohio State, marketing degree, big dreams of Manhattan skyscrapers and corner offices with views of Central Park. Reality had been crueler. Her first apartment in New York was a fifth-floor walk-up with roaches and a shower that only produced cold water. Her entry-level marketing job paid $43,000 a year, which sounded like a fortune until she factored in rent, student loans, and the cost of looking professional enough to survive in a world where everyone else seemed born wearing Prada. For 3 years, she ate ramen and wore the same 6 outfits on rotation. She worked 80-hour weeks. She pitched ideas that her bosses took credit for. She smiled through the exhaustion and the mounting credit card debt and the slow realization that she was drowning. Then she met Grant Hawthorne. He had visited the marketing agency where she worked, looking for a team to rebrand his company's artificial intelligence division. Brittany had been pulled into the pitch meeting at the last minute when a senior associate called in sick. She had stayed up all night preparing, running on coffee and desperation. Grant had listened to her presentation with those sharp blue eyes, and when she finished, he said, "That's the first intelligent thing I've heard all week. What's your name?" "Brittany Shaw, sir." "Don't call me sir. It makes me feel old." He smiled, and something in her chest had fluttered. "How would you like to work directly with Hawthorne Technologies? I need someone with your instincts on my team." That had been 18 months ago. The job offer came with a salary of $120,000. Suddenly, Brittany could afford an apartment without roaches. She could buy clothes that didn't come from discount racks. She could breathe. Grant was married, but he said the marriage was over in everything but paperwork. His wife, Catherine, was cold. He explained. She had checked out years ago, more interested in her charitable foundations and museum boards than in him. They maintained separate bedrooms. The divorce was coming. He promised. But these things took time when you had his kind of money. Brittany told herself she wasn't a home wrecker. The home was already wrecked. She was just giving Grant something he deserved. Someone who saw his brilliance and his ambition and reflected it back to him. The affair had started on a business trip to Miami. They had worked late in his hotel suite, reviewing marketing strategies, and somewhere between the second bottle of wine and the view of the ocean at midnight, he had kissed her. She kissed him back. After that, everything moved fast. Private jets, shopping trips where he bought her dresses that cost more than her college textbooks, late-night dinners at restaurants she had only read about in magazines. He made her feel seen in a way her struggling family never could. They loved her, but they didn't understand her hunger for something bigger. Grant understood. He had that same hunger. Tonight was supposed to be the beginning of everything. The annual Hawthorne Foundation Gala was the social event of the New York season, and Grant was bringing her as his official companion. Not hidden away anymore. Not a secret. The society pages would photograph them together. The whispers would become headlines. He had promised her more than that. A new position was being created. Chief Strategy Officer. Her title, her office, her seat at the table where decisions were made. She would be legitimate, powerful, indispensable. Brittany finished her makeup and stepped into the gold dress Grant had sent over that morning. It was a designer she couldn't pronounce. Liquid silk that clung to every curve. She looked like someone who belonged in that world. Her phone buzzed. A text from Grant. Car's downstairs. You ready to change everything? She texted back, born ready. As she rode the elevator down, Brittany allowed herself one last moment of doubt. In 18 months, she had never met Catherine. Grant said his wife avoided public events, preferred her quiet life uptown. But Brittany had Googled her obsessively. Catherine Whitmore Hawthorne, old money, elegant in that untouchable way rich women always looked in photographs. There weren't many pictures, actually. Catherine seemed to exist in the background of her husband's success. A ghost in expensive clothes? Good, Brittany thought as she stepped into the waiting town car. Ghost didn't fight back. The driver pulled away from her building, heading toward Manhattan, toward the Gala, toward her future. Brittany looked out the window at the city lights and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Victory. Grant Hawthorne adjusted his bow tie in the car's mirror and felt the familiar rush of power that came before important moments. Tonight, he would make his relationship with Brittany official. The board would have to accept it. Catherine would have to accept it. The entire world would see that he was a man who took what he wanted. He was 52 years old and felt younger than he had in decades. Brittany made him feel that way. She looked at him with admiration, hung on his every word, laughed at his jokes. She wanted to be around him, wanted to touch him, wanted to be part of his world. Catherine hadn't looked at him like that in 15 years. His marriage had been strategic from the beginning, though he hadn't thought of it that way at the time. He was 30, scrappy, brilliant, and broke. He had a PhD in computer science from MIT and ideas that could change the world, but no money to build them. Catherine Whitmore was the daughter of George Whitmore, the semiconductor genius who held patents on chip architecture that every tech company in the world wanted to license. Catherine had been beautiful in a severe way, whip-smart, with a venture capitalist's eye for potential. She saw something in Grant's pitch about artificial intelligence integration. More than that, she saw something in him. They married 6 months after meeting. Her father's patents became the foundation of Hawthorne Technologies. Grant was the CEO, the face, the vision. Catherine worked behind the scenes, managing investments and legal structures. It had worked for a while, but Catherine had wanted partnership, and Grant wanted worship. She questioned his decisions, pushed back on his more aggressive expansions, talked about sustainability and long-term planning when he wanted to strike while the market was hot. She made him feel managed, controlled, like a child with an allowance instead of a king with a kingdom. Brittany never questioned him. She trusted him. She believed in him. The car pulled up to the museum, and Grant saw Brittany waiting in the gold dress. She looked like a trophy, and he meant that as the highest compliment. He had earned this. 20 years of building an empire, of schmoozing investors and battling competitors. He deserved someone young and beautiful on his arm, someone who made other men jealous. "You look incredible," he said as she slid into the seat beside him. "So do you." She touched his hand, and he felt that electric thrill. They drove the 15 blocks to the Met in comfortable silence. Grant mentally reviewed his speech. He would talk about innovation, about the future, about bold leadership. He would gesture toward Brittany at key moments, let the implication hang in the air. By tomorrow morning, the society pages would be speculating, and by next week, he would confirm it. Catherine was out. Brittany was in. The divorce would be expensive, but he had planned for that. Catherine would get a settlement, the townhouse, whatever she wanted. She would fade back into her quiet Upper East Side existence, and he would move forward with a woman who actually cared about being at his side. "Nervous?" Brittany asked. "Never." He lied. He was always nervous before big moments, but showing vulnerability was weakness. Tonight is going to be perfect. The car pulled up to the red carpet. Flashbulbs exploded. Grant stepped out first, buttoned his tuxedo jacket, then offered his hand to Brittany. She emerged like a starlet, all gleaming skin and confidence. The cameras went wild. Grant guided her up the steps, his hand possessive on the small of her back. He nodded to reporters, answered a few shouted questions with practiced charm. Brittany handled it beautifully, smiling and waving like she had been born to this. Inside the great hall, the gala was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over the crowd of Manhattan's elite. Tech billionaires mingled with old money socialites. Politicians glad-handed donors. This was Grant's world, and he owned every inch of it. He introduced Brittany to everyone who mattered. "This is Brittany Shaw, my new strategic partner." The phrase was deliberately ambiguous, professionally appropriate but personally suggestive. He watched the calculations happen behind polite smiles. Miles Porter, his biggest rival and CEO of Porter Systems, watched from across the room with an expression Grant couldn't quite read. Amusement, pity. Grant ignored him. Miles was yesterday's news, running a company built on outdated infrastructure while Hawthorne Technologies led the AI revolution. They moved through the crowd, champagne glasses in hand. Brittany played her part flawlessly, discussing market trends with venture capitalists and complimenting donors on their jewelry. She fit perfectly. At 7:30, the foundation chairman found Grant. "We're ready for your keynote whenever you are." Grant squeezed Brittany's hand. "Wish me luck." "You don't need it," she whispered. He walked to the small stage at the front of the hall, and the crowd quieted. The lights focused on him. This was his favorite part, the moment when hundreds of powerful people stopped everything to listen to him speak. "Good evening," he began, his voice resonant and confident. "Tonight we celebrate innovation, vision, and the courage to embrace the future." He was 3 minutes into his carefully crafted speech when he noticed the shift, a ripple of whispers starting from the back of the room, heads turning, the focused attention fragmenting. Grant paused mid-sentence. What could possibly be more interesting than him? He followed their gaze toward the entrance. A woman stood silhouetted in the archway. She wasn't wearing a gown. She wore a midnight blue Armani pantsuit that screamed power, not prettiness. Her silver blonde hair was pulled back in a severe chignon. On her lapel was a simple diamond brooch he recognized, the first piece of jewelry he had ever given her 22 years ago. It was Catherine. Grant's mouth went dry. His wife never came to these events. She hated the publicity, the crowds. They had an understanding. She stayed in her world. He stayed in his. Catherine began walking forward, and the crowd parted like water around a ship. She moved with calm purpose, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Every step was measured, controlled, terrifying. Grant looked from his wife's expressionless face to Brittany at the front table. The younger woman had gone pale beneath her makeup, her gold dress suddenly looking garish instead of glamorous. The microphone felt slippery in Grant's sweating hands. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, to regain control of the room. But Catherine was already climbing the stairs to the stage, and Grant Hawthorne, for the first time in 20 years, had no idea what to say. Catherine Whitmore Hawthorne had not slept in 48 hours. She had spent that time with her attorney Vincent Cross, reviewing documents, filing injunctions, and preparing for this exact moment. Every detail had been planned with surgical precision, every contingency anticipated. She was exhausted. She was furious. And she was finally up after years of silence, ready to speak. The museum lights were hot on her face as she stepped onto the stage. Grant stood frozen at the lectern, his confident mask cracking. Good. She wanted him afraid. She wanted him to feel a fraction of what she had felt 3 months ago when their son Derek had accidentally forwarded her an email chain that revealed the full extent of Grant's plans. The email had been between Grant and his personal lawyer, discussing how to structure Brittany's new chief strategy officer position to maximize her compensation while minimizing board oversight. There were financial projections showing how Grant planned to gradually shift company resources toward projects Brittany would control. There was even a tentative timeline for when Grant planned to file for divorce, carefully timed to avoid disrupting a major product launch. Reading those emails, Catherine had felt something crack inside her. Not her heart. That had been numb for years. What cracked was her patience. For 2 decades, she had been the silent partner. She had managed the Whitmore family trusts that held the company's majority shares. She had overseen the patent portfolio that generated 40% of the company's revenue. She had provided the stable financial foundation that allowed Grant to take his celebrated risks. She had done it all quietly, without praise or recognition, because that was the arrangement. Grant needed to be the public face, the visionary, the hero. His ego required it, and Catherine had loved him once, had believed in him, had thought partnership meant each person playing to their strengths. She had been wrong. Grant hadn't wanted a partner. He had wanted an audience. Now, standing on the stage in front of 500 of New York's most powerful people, Catherine adjusted the microphone and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. She recognized most of them. These were people she had helped, advised, or supported through her foundation work. They just didn't know it, because she had always let Grant take credit. That ended tonight. "Good evening," she said, her voice calm and clear. "I apologize for interrupting my husband's speech. He appears to have lost his place." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. "Grant has always been an excellent storyteller," Catherine continued. "But I find that as we get older, facts become more important than fiction." She paused, letting the words settle. Every eye in the room was locked on her. This was power, she realized. Not the false power of applause and admiration, but the real power of truth. "My husband spoke tonight about bold new futures for Hawthorne Technologies. On that point, we agree. The company is entering a new era. What he failed to mention are the precise mechanics of that transition." Grant finally found his voice. "Catherine, this isn't the time or place. On the contrary," she cut him off smoothly, "this is exactly the time and place. You chose to make this public. Darling, I'm simply joining the conversation." She turned back to the audience, and her eyes briefly found Brittany Shaw at the front table. The young woman looked like she might be sick. Catherine felt no satisfaction in that, only tired resolution. "Most of you know me as Catherine Hawthorne, Grant's wife, the quiet one, the one who chairs library committees and hosts charity luncheons. This narrative has been convenient. It allowed my husband to be the public face of our business while I manage the foundational aspects of our wealth." She paused and took a deliberate sip from the glass of water on the lectern. The room was absolutely silent. "When my father, George Whitmore, passed away in 2003, he left his entire estate in a trust, the Catherine Whitmore Trust. To be exact, this trust includes his portfolio of semiconductor patents, which remain the backbone of modern microprocessor design. It was that trust, and only that trust, that provided the seed capital, the intellectual property, and the collateral for the company that became Hawthorne Technologies." Catherine saw the understanding dawn on faces throughout the room. Miles Porter sat up straighter, his expression sharp with interest. Board members exchanged glances. Investors pulled out phones, presumably to check facts. "The legal structure is quite simple," Catherine continued, steel entering her voice. "The Whitmore Trust is the majority shareholder of Hawthorne Technologies, holding 62% of all voting stock. I am the sole trustee and sole beneficiary of that trust. My husband was granted the position of CEO and chairman as part of a management agreement, contingent upon his acting in the best financial interests of the trust. Of my interests." Grant's face had gone from red to ashen. He looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. "For the past 18 months, Catherine said, her gaze flickering toward Brittany again, "Mr. Hawthorne has engaged in behavior that violates his fiduciary duty. He has used corporate funds for personal expenditures that exceed his compensation package. He has leveraged company assets for non-business purposes." She let the euphemism hang in the air. Everyone in the room understood what she meant. His recent attempts to create a senior executive position without board approval, specifically designed to benefit an individual with whom he has a personal relationship, constitutes a flagrant breach of his management contract. Brittany Shaw looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Good. The girl needed to understand what she had really been part of. "Therefore," Catherine announced, her voice ringing with finality, "as of 9 p.m. this evening, I exercised my right as sole trustee to terminate Grant Hawthorne's management contract for cause. Effective immediately, he is removed as CEO and chairman of the board of Hawthorne Technologies." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, the frantic clicking of phone cameras. Grant staggered backward, gripping the edge of the lectern for support. "Furthermore," Catherine wasn't finished. "The board convened via emergency conference call 2 hours ago. They unanimously voted to install an interim CEO while a permanent replacement is found. As majority shareholder, I will assume the role of executive chairwoman to guide the company through this transition." She finally looked directly at Grant. For a moment, she let him see past the controlled exterior to the deep disappointment beneath. "Richard, your personal effects will be packed and sent to your club. The townhouse locks have been changed. Corporate accounts have been frozen. My attorney has drafted a severance package, one far more generous than you deserve. I suggest you sign it. She turned back to the audience one last time. I apologize for bringing business to a charity event, but when an infection is found, it must be excised swiftly before it poisons the entire organism. Hawthorne Technologies was built on solid foundations. It will have a bold, transparent future. Thank you. Catherine stepped back from the microphone. She had not raised her voice. She had not cried. She had simply and methodically dismantled her husband's empire in less than 5 minutes. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, Miles Porter rose to his feet and began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate applause. Not celebration, acknowledgement. Others joined him. Not everyone, but enough. The sound filled the hall like a verdict being read. Catherine descended the stage, flanked by 2 security personnel Vincent had hired for the evening. She walked through the crowd with her head high, accepting murmured congratulations and offers of support with gracious nods. Behind her, Grant stood alone on the stage, a king without a kingdom, watching his world end in flashbulbs and whispers. And at the front table, Brittany Shaw was already running for the exit. Brittany's heels caught on the museum steps as she fled into the cold October night. Behind her, she could hear the chaos inside the gala, hundreds of voices rising in shocked conversation. Ahead of her, photographers were already gathering, cameras raised like weapons. Ms. Shaw, did you know about the embezzlement? Brittany, how long have you been sleeping with a married man? Is it true you were going to be made chief strategy officer? She pushed through them, hand raised to block her face, and stumbled toward the street. Her phone was already exploding with notifications, text messages, Instagram comments, Twitter mentions. The internet worked fast. She flagged down a cab, practically falling into the back seat. Astoria, Queens, please, just drive. The driver pulled away from the curb, and Brittany finally looked at her phone. Her Instagram feed was a nightmare. The post from that afternoon, the one with the cryptic new chapter caption and a photo of her in the gold dress, had 10,000 comments in the past 30 minutes. Home wrecker. You really thought you could replace her. Gold digger got what she deserved. Hope prison is worth it. Prison. What were they talking about? She scrolled frantically and found a tweet from Jade Montgomery, the tech journalist who had live tweeted the entire Gala meltdown. The tweet had been retweeted 40,000 times. Breaking sources confirm FBI is investigating Grant Hawthorne for embezzlement, 2.3 M in company funds allegedly used for personal expenses, including gifts to girlfriend Brittany Shaw. She may face charges for receiving stolen property. Brittany's hands started shaking so violently, she almost dropped her phone. This couldn't be real. The jewelry, the apartment deposit Grant had helped her with, the car he had bought her for her birthday, those were gifts. She hadn't known they were purchased with stolen money. Had she? She thought back to all the shopping trips, the casual way Grant would swipe his corporate card and say, business expense, you're part of the team now. She had never questioned it. She had wanted to believe she deserved those things. The cab pulled up to her building, and Brittany stumbled out, shoving cash at the driver. She rode the elevator to her floor in a daze. Inside her apartment, she finally allowed herself to break down. She had quit her old job to work for Hawthorne Technologies. She had burned bridges with the marketing agency, telling them Grant was giving her opportunities they never could. She had moved into this more expensive apartment because Grant said she needed to look the part of an executive. She had spent money she didn't have on clothes and dinners and maintaining an image, all of it based on promises Grant had made, promises he apparently had no authority to keep. Her phone rang. Her mother. Brittany couldn't answer it. What would she even say? Hi, Mom. Remember how I told you I was dating a brilliant CEO who was going to give me the career of my dreams? Turns out he's a criminal, and I might go to prison for being stupid enough to believe him. She let it go to voicemail. Then her father called. Then her sister. She turned off her phone. For 3 hours, Brittany sat on her couch in the gold dress that suddenly felt like a costume, staring at nothing. Around midnight, she finally changed into pajamas and tried to sleep. She couldn't. At 2 a.m., someone knocked on her door. Hard, official knocking. Ms. Shaw, FBI, we need to ask you some questions. The FBI agents were polite but firm. They asked Brittany to come to their field office for an interview, just to clear some things up. She knew enough from television to ask if she was under arrest. Not at this time, the female agent said, but we strongly encourage your cooperation. Brittany went with them because she didn't know what else to do. At the field office, they put her in a small, windowless room and asked her to explain her relationship with Grant Hawthorne. She told them everything: the affair, the promises, the gifts. She showed them text messages where Grant had said things like, "Don't worry about money, and you deserve the best." She emphasized over and over that she had thought the gifts were legitimate, that she had no idea he was stealing from the company. The male agent, whose name was Rodriguez, listened with an expression that gave nothing away. "Ms. Shaw, did Mr. Hawthorne ever discuss the company's financial controls with you? Did he ever ask you to sign documents or help him move money?" "No, never. I worked in marketing. I had nothing to do with finance." "But you knew about the chief strategy officer position he was creating for you. He said it was approved by the board." "It wasn't." Rodriguez slid a document across the table. It was an email from Grant to his personal attorney, discussing how to structure Brittany's compensation to minimize scrutiny and avoid board oversight. The numbers were staggering: $300,000 salary, stock options worth another $2 million, a discretionary budget of $500,000 annually. "Did you know the position came with this level of compensation?" Rodriguez asked. Brittany stared at the numbers. She had known the job would pay well, but this was absurd. No marketing executive made this kind of money, especially not one with her limited experience. "I thought I was being paid for my skills," she whispered. The female agent, whose name was Martinez, spoke more gently. "Ms. Shaw, from where we're sitting, it looks like Mr. Hawthorne created a position designed to funnel company money to you. Whether you knew that or not will determine whether you face charges." Brittany felt her chest tighten. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." They kept her there for 6 hours, asking the same questions in different ways, showing her financial records and emails she had never seen. By the time they released her at 8 a.m., Brittany was shaking with exhaustion and terror. "Don't leave the city," Rodriguez said as she stumbled out. "We'll be in touch." She took a cab back to Astoria, climbed the 5 flights to her apartment, and found an eviction notice taped to her door. The apartment was leased under a corporate account, which had been frozen. She had 30 days to vacate. Brittany went inside, locked the door, and slid down to the floor. She had no job. Her relationship with Grant was obviously over. The FBI thought she might be a criminal. Her face was all over the internet, attached to the words "mistress" and "gold digger." Her family was calling nonstop, and she couldn't bear to talk to them. She had nothing. Her phone rang again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Ms. Shaw, this is Tyler Barnes from the Public Defender's Office. The FBI contacted us about your case. I'd like to meet with you to discuss your legal options." "I can't afford a lawyer, Brittany said numbly. "That's why I'm calling. If you qualify financially, we can represent you at no cost. Can you come to our office this afternoon?" She went because what choice did she have? Tyler Barnes was younger than she expected, maybe 35, with tired eyes and a cheap suit. His office was cluttered with case files and smelled like burnt coffee. He listened to her story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Okay, here's the situation. The FBI has evidence that Grant Hawthorne embezzled approximately $2.3 million in company funds. They can trace at least $400,000 directly to purchases that benefited you. The jewelry, the car, deposits into accounts in your name. I didn't ask for any of that. He just gave it to me. I believe you. But here's the problem. Legally, if you knowingly received stolen property, you can be charged regardless of whether you asked for it. The prosecution will argue that you should have known something was wrong. A car that costs $80,000, jewelry worth 50 grand. These aren't normal gifts." Brittany felt sick. "So I'm going to prison." "Not necessarily. Here's what I think is happening. Grant Hawthorne is facing serious federal charges. The U.S. Attorney's Office is going to offer him a deal. Reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation. But to make that deal attractive, they need leverage. That leverages you. I don't understand. Tyler leaned forward. They want you scared enough to testify against him. If you cooperate fully, tell them everything you know. Testify at trial if it comes to that. I think I can negotiate immunity for you. You'd avoid charges completely. I'd have to testify against Grant. Yes. Brittany thought about Grant's promises, his charm, the way he had made her feel special. Then she thought about the FBI agents, the eviction notice. Her face plastered across gossip websites with criminal speculation. Grant had used her. He had dangled a fantasy in front of her, knowing it was built on stolen money and lies. He had let her believe she was smart and talented and deserving, when really she was just another transaction. When do I talk to the prosecutors? She asked. 3 days later, Brittany sat in a conference room at the U.S. Attorney's office with Tyler Barnes on one side and 2 federal prosecutors on the other. They laid out their case against Grant Hawthorne with clinical precision. He had embezzled money through a series of fake consulting contracts and inflated expense reports. He had created shell companies to hide asset transfers. He had used his position as CEO to bypass normal financial controls. The evidence was overwhelming. We're going to put him away for 7 to 10 years, the lead prosecutor said. Her name was Andrea Walsh, and she had the clipped efficiency of someone who won most of her cases. But we want more than that. We want a message sent to every corporate executive who thinks they're above the law. What does that have to do with me? Brittany asked. You're the sympathetic victim, Mama, Walsh said bluntly. Young woman, seduced by powerful man, used as a pawn in his scheme. Jury will love you. Your testimony will be compelling. Tyler cut in. And in exchange for that testimony, you're offering full immunity. Complete immunity from all charges related to receiving stolen property. We'll also recommend leniency to the SEC regarding any civil penalties. Ms. Shaw walks away clean. It sounded too good to be true. What's the catch? Walsh smiled thinly. You have to tell the truth, the whole truth, about your relationship with Grant Hawthorne. That means discussing the affair in explicit detail. It means admitting you knew he was married. It means every intimate moment becoming part of the public record. This won't be pleasant for you. Brittany thought about it. Her reputation was already destroyed. The internet had already decided who she was. At least this way, she could avoid prison and maybe start rebuilding her life. I'll do it, she said. The prosecutors had her sign paperwork, and then they spent 6 hours going through her entire relationship with Grant. They asked about every gift, every trip, every conversation where he had discussed company business. They asked about the promises he made, the lies he told about his marriage, the way he had structured her job to avoid oversight. By the end, Brittany felt hollowed out. She had laid bare every stupid, naive decision she had made over the past 18 months. She had admitted to falling for a married man, to believing obvious lies, to being so desperate for success that she had ignored every red flag. One more thing, Walsh said as they were finishing. Grant Hawthorne's attorney has reached out to us. He wants to meet with you. Why? He claims Grant has information that could help your case. He wants to talk to you directly. Work something out. I suspect it's a trap. He's going to try to get you to say something incriminating while wearing a wire for his own plea deal. So I shouldn't meet him. Walsh shrugged. That's up to you. But if you do, assume everything you say is being recorded. Don't admit to anything. Don't make deals. Don't trust a word he says. Understood. Brittany understood. But part of her, the part that still remembered how Grant used to look at her like she was the most important person in the world, wanted to hear what he had to say. She agreed to the meeting. They met at a coffee shop in Midtown, neutral territory. Grant looked terrible. He had lost weight, and there were shadows under his eyes. He wore jeans and a sweater instead of his usual tailored suits. He looked like what he was, a disgraced executive facing federal prison time. Brittany, he said when she sat down across from him, thank you for coming. She didn't say anything. She just watched him, trying to see past the charm to the calculating man underneath. I know you're angry, Grant continued. You have every right to be. I made mistakes. I let my ego get ahead of my judgment. But I want you to know, what we had was real. I cared about you. You used me, Brittany said flatly. No, I mean, yes, I made bad decisions about the money, But my feelings for you were genuine. I was going to leave Catherine. I was going to make you chief strategy officer. It was all going to work out. None of it was real. Grant, the job didn't exist. You didn't have the authority to give it to me, and you were never going to leave your wife because she owned everything. You were just the employee. Grant flinched. Catherine blindsided me. I didn't know about the management contract clauses. My own attorney had buried the details. I thought I had more control than I did. That's not my problem. But it could be. Grant leaned forward, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Look, the prosecutors want to destroy me. They want to make an example. But if you testify, if you tell them I manipulated you, that you were just a victim, they're going to go even harder. I'll get the maximum sentence. Again, not my problem. What if I told you there was another way I have offshore accounts Catherine doesn't know about? Cryptocurrency. Untraceable. Enough money for both of us to disappear. Come with me. Brittany. We can still have the life we planned. For just a second, Brittany was tempted. Not because she still loved Grant, but because the alternative was facing her ruined life alone. Then she remembered Andrea Walsh's warning. He's wearing a wire. This whole conversation was designed to get her to admit she knew about hidden money, that she was willing to flee with a federal fugitive. If she said yes, she would be charged as an accomplice. I can't do that, Grant, she said carefully. His expression hardened. You're working with them. You made a deal. I'm trying to survive. Something you should understand. If you testify against me, I will make sure everyone knows the truth about you, that you knew exactly what you were doing, that you pushed for that, demanded those gifts. I'll make you look just as guilty as I am. There it was, the real Grant, stripped of charm and pretense, a man who would burn her to save himself. Brittany stood up. Do whatever you need to do, Grant. I'll be doing the same. She walked out of the coffee shop, got 3 blocks away, and then called Andrea Walsh. He tried to get me to flee the country with him, Brittany said. He was definitely recording? Walsh's laugh was sharp. He just committed witness tampering on tape. Thank you, Ms. Shaw. You may have just added years to his sentence. Brittany hung up and kept walking, aimless, in the Manhattan crowds. She had just betrayed the man she thought she loved, and she felt nothing but exhausted relief. 6 months later, Brittany sat in a federal courtroom and told her story to a jury of 12 strangers. She described meeting Grant, the promises he made, the glamorous life he offered. She described the gifts and the trips and the nights when he made her feel like she was the center of his universe. Then she described the gala, the humiliation, the FBI investigation. She described learning that everything had been built on lies and stolen money. She described the eviction, the death threats on social media, moving back to Ohio to live with her parents because she had nowhere else to go. Grant's attorney tried to paint her as a calculating seductress, a woman who knowingly participated in fraud, but Brittany had emails, texts, and her own obvious naivety working in her favor. The jury saw a young woman who had been used by a powerful man. Grant took the stand in his own defense, which his attorney had advised against. He was a disaster. He blamed Catherine for his failures, blamed the board for not supporting him, blamed Brittany for distracting him from his responsibilities. He took responsibility for nothing. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Grant Hawthorne Orange to 9 years in federal prison, with no possibility of early parole. He would also be required to repay the embezzled funds and pay substantial fines. By the time he got out, he would be 61 years old, broke, and unemployable. Brittany watched from the gallery as they led him away in handcuffs. She felt no triumph, only a hollow sense of closure. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed her. She had prepared a brief statement with Tyler Barnes. I made mistakes, she read from her phone. I trusted someone I shouldn't have. I ignored warning signs because I wanted to believe in a fantasy. I'm not proud of my choices, but I'm committed to learning from them and moving forward. I hope my story can serve as a warning to others, especially young women, about the dangers of getting involved with powerful people who make promises they can't keep. Thank you. She didn't take questions. She just walked away, Tyler beside her for moral support. What now? He asked. Now I figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be someone I'm not. Brittany said it would take time. She had enrolled in an MBA program, paying for it with student loans because all the money Grant had given her had been seized as evidence. She was working at a nonprofit that helped women escape financial abuse, using her story to teach others about coercive control and economic manipulation. Her Instagram was deleted. Her LinkedIn was scrubbed of any mention of Grant or Hawthorne Technologies. She was rebuilding from scratch. And this time, she was doing it honestly. 6 months after the trial, Brittany got an unexpected call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Ms. Shaw, this is Catherine Hawthorne. I was wondering if you had time to meet for coffee. Catherine chose a quiet cafe in the West Village, far from anywhere they might be recognized. She was already seated when Brittany arrived, wearing casual clothes and reading glasses that made her look more approachable than she had at the gala. Thank you for coming, Catherine said, and as Brittany sat down. I know this must be strange. That's an understatement. Brittany ordered coffee from the hovering waiter, buying herself time to figure out what was happening. Why did you want to meet? Closure, I suppose. And curiosity. I've spent 2 years dismantling my marriage and rebuilding my company. I've read every article about the trial, watched your testimony, but I realized I never actually talked to you, the woman my husband chose over me. Brittany flinched. I didn't know about you. I mean, I knew you existed, but Grant said that we were separated, that I was cold and uninterested in him, that the marriage was over in everything but paperwork. Catherine's voice was matter of fact, not angry. He told me similar things about his previous affairs. There were 3 before you, though none as public. There were others. Grant had a pattern. He found ambitious young women, usually employees, and promised them the world. When they became inconvenient, he moved on. You were different only because I decided to stop it before he could discard you the way he did the others. Brittany felt sick. So I was just another in a line. You were a victim of a predatory man who used his power to manipulate people. That's why I wanted to talk to you. I've been angry at you for 2 years. Angry that you didn't question his lies. Angry that you participated in the charade at the gala. Angry that you existed at all. But that anger was misplaced. Catherine took off her glasses and looked directly at Brittany. You were 27 years old, struggling financially, facing down student debt and an uncertain future. Grant was a billionaire CEO who offered you salvation. Of course you believed him. You wanted to believe him. He counted on that. I still made a choice, Brittany said quietly. I knew he was married, even if I believed they were separated. I could have waited. I could have said no. Yes, you could have, and that was wrong. But Grant was the one with power, with responsibility, with a fiduciary duty to the company and a marital commitment to me. He's the one who stole money and created fraudulent positions. You made a moral mistake. He committed crimes. They sat in silence for a moment, 2 women on opposite sides of the same terrible story. How are you doing? Catherine asked. Really? Brittany considered lying, putting on the brave face she showed the world. But Catherine had earned honesty. Some days are better than others. I'm in therapy twice a week. I still have panic attacks when I see my name in articles. My family has forgiven me, but things are strained. I'm broken, living with my parents at 29, but I'm alive, and I'm not in prison, and I'm learning who I am when I'm not performing for someone else's approval. Catherine nodded. That last part is the hardest. I spent 20 years being Grant's wife, the silent partner, the woman behind the throne. When I finally took control of my own company, I had to figure out who Catherine was, not just who Grant's wife had been. It's lonely and terrifying, and sometimes I miss the simplicity of letting someone else take the lead. Do you regret it? The gala, the public humiliation? No. Catherine's answer was immediate. Grant would have destroyed the company my father built. He would have bankrupted it with his ego and his schemes. What I did was necessary. But I regret that it hurt other people, including you. You didn't deserve to be collateral damage in my war with my husband. I appreciate you saying that, Brittany said. But I was more than collateral damage. I was an active participant. I need to own that. You're wiser than you were 2 years ago. I'm more broken than I was 2 years ago. But yes, I suppose that comes with wisdom. Catherine reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. I'm starting a foundation for women in technology, mentorship, scholarships, advocacy. I'd like you to consider joining the advisory board. Your story, as painful as it is, could help other young women avoid similar situations. And the salary would help you get back on your feet. Brittany stared at the card. Why would you want to help me? Because you're not my enemy. You never were. Patriarchy is the enemy. Systems that give men like Grant power over women like us, that's the enemy. We spent 2 years fighting each other over a man who wasn't worth either of our time. I'd rather spend the next 20 years fighting for something that matters. It was an olive branch Brittany hadn't expected and didn't feel she deserved. But she took the card. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I ask. Catherine stood, preparing to leave, then paused. One more thing. It gets easier. The shame, the humiliation, the feeling that everyone is judging you. It fades, not completely, but enough that you can breathe. You'll be okay. Brittany, you're stronger than you think. After Catherine left, Brittany sat alone in the cafe, turning the business card over in her hands. She thought about the woman she had been 2 years ago, desperate and ambitious and so certain she knew what she wanted. That woman would have seen Catherine's offer as another shortcut, another powerful person to attach herself to. But Brittany wasn't that woman anymore. She had been broken down and forced to rebuild herself piece by piece. She had learned that there were no shortcuts, no saviors, no easy paths to success. There was only the hard work of becoming someone she could respect. She put the business card in her wallet and ordered another coffee. She had an evening shift at the nonprofit in 2 hours. After that, homework for her organizational behavior class. It was a small life, unglamorous and exhausting, but it was hers. 2 years after the trial, Catherine Hawthorne stood in the lobby of Whitmore Technologies, formerly Hawthorne Technologies, and watched her son Derek give a presentation to potential investors. He was 26 now, MBA, from Stanford, and had chosen to join the family business rather than strike out on his own. We're not just building artificial intelligence, Derek was saying, his voice confident but not arrogant. We're building ethical AI, systems that prioritize transparency and accountability. We learned the hard way what happens when technology companies prioritize growth over responsibility. Catherine felt a swell of pride. Derek understood the lessons of the past 4 years. He had watched his father's empire collapse and had seen his mother rebuild it with integrity. He was determined not to repeat Grant's mistakes. The presentation ended, and investors shook Derek's hand, impressed by his vision. As they filed out, he walked over to Catherine. "How did I do?" he asked. "You were excellent. Your grandfather would have been proud." Derek smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "I wish he could have seen this. The company back on track. The family name restored. He knew we would figure it out eventually. The Ditt family has survived worse than one narcissistic son-in-law." They walked together through the building, past offices where engineers and designers worked on projects that actually mattered. Catherine had cut the flashy, acquisition-driven strategy Grant had favored. Instead, she focused on sustainable innovation, long-term partnerships, and treating employees like humans rather than resources. The stock price had dipped initially when Grant was removed, but it had steadily climbed as investors recognized the company was now run by someone who understood both business and ethics. Catherine had proven that you didn't need to be ruthless to be successful. "Mom, so," Derek said as they reached her office. "I got a call from Dad's lawyer. He's up for parole review next month. He wants to know if we'll write letters of support." Catherine had been expecting this. Grant would be eligible for early release after serving 6 years of his 9-year sentence. He had been a model prisoner, apparently, teaching business classes to other inmates and avoiding trouble. "What do you want to do?" she asked Derek. "I don't know. He's still my father. But every time I think about what he did, not just the money but the way he treated you, the way he used that woman, I get angry all over again." Anger is healthy. It means you understand the gravity of what he did. But anger doesn't have to define your relationship with him forever. "Are you going to write a letter?" Catherine walked to her window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. 4 years ago, she had stood in a museum and destroyed her husband's life in front of 500 people. It had been necessary. but it had also been brutal. "I'm not going to support his early release," she said finally. "He needs to serve his full sentence. But when he gets out, I'm not going to stand in the way of him rebuilding a relationship with you and your sister. He's your father. Whatever my feelings about him as a husband, that relationship is yours to define." Derek nodded, accepting her answer. After he left, Catherine returned to her desk and found an email from Brittany Shaw. The younger woman had accepted a position on the advisory board for Catherine's Women in Technology Foundation and had been working with them for 18 months. The email was a report on their latest mentorship program, which paired young women in tech with experienced female executives. The program was a success. They had mentored 50 women in the past year, providing not just career advice but financial literacy training and warnings about workplace harassment. Brittany had been instrumental in developing the curriculum, drawing from her own painful experiences. Catherine read through the report with satisfaction. This was the legacy she wanted to build. Not just a profitable company, but a support system for the women who came after her. Her phone rang. It was Rachel Winters, her oldest friend and therapist. "Are you still coming to dinner tonight?" Rachel asked. "Wouldn't miss it. Should I bring wine?" "Always wine. And Catherine, I'm proud of you. You've done something remarkable these past few years." After hanging up, Catherine allowed herself a moment of reflection. The past 4 years had been the hardest of her life. She had ended her marriage, publicly humiliated her husband, rebuilt her company, and confronted every assumption she had about power, success, and what it meant to be strong. She had learned that strength wasn't silence. Strength was speaking up when it mattered. Even if your voice shook, strength was admitting mistakes and growing from them. Strength was building something better from the ruins of something broken. She thought about Brittany, who had gone from mistress to survivor to advocate. She thought about Derek, who was building a career based on ethics rather than ego. She thought about the women in their mentorship program, learning to navigate a world that too often tried to diminish them. And she thought about Grant, sitting in a prison cell, finally facing consequences for his actions. Was it enough? Would he actually change? Or would he emerge from prison, the same narcissist who had entered it? Catherine didn't know. She only knew that she had done what she could to protect her family, her company, and the women who might otherwise fall for men like Grant. That night, Catherine drove to Rachel's house in Westchester. They sat on the porch with wine and watched the sun set over the Hudson River. "Do you ever regret how you handled it?" Rachel asked. "The public confrontation, the way you destroyed him in front of everyone." Catherine considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I wish I had been kinder, but I don't regret protecting what my father built. I don't regret stopping Grant before he could do more damage. And I don't regret showing Brittany and every other young woman watching that they don't have to accept powerful men's lies." That's a good answer. They sat in comfortable silence, two friends who had known each other for 40 years, who had survived divorces and career changes and the complicated messiness of real life. "What's next for you?" Rachel finally asked. Catherine smiled. "I'm dating a history professor. He's brilliant and kind and completely uninterested in my money. We went to a bookstore last weekend and spent 3 hours just browsing. It was the most romantic date I've had in 20 years. "That sounds perfect." "It is. He's 62, divorced, loves hiking and documentaries. He thinks my job is interesting but doesn't define me by it. When I'm with him, I'm just Catherine, not the billionaire CEO, not the woman who destroyed her husband, just me." Rachel raised her glass. "To just being Catherine. To just being Catherine," Catherine echoed. As the sun finished setting and the first stars appeared, Catherine felt something she hadn't felt in decades: peace. Not the false peace of avoidance or the brittle peace of suppressed rage, but the real peace of someone who had fought her battles and earned her rest. She had lost a marriage, but gained her self-respect. She had lost a husband, but found her strength. She had survived the worst betrayal and emerged not broken, but rebuilt. Somewhere in Queens, Brittany Shaw was probably finishing her homework, preparing for another day of work and school and slow, difficult growth. Somewhere in federal prison, Grant Hawthorne was counting down the days until release, possibly learning nothing. And here, on a porch in Westchester, Catherine was drinking wine with her best friend and planning a future that belonged entirely to her. The story that had started with a gala and ended with a trial was really a story about two women learning that they were never competing with each other. They were competing with a system that told them their value came from powerful men's approval. They had both learned better, and now they were teaching that lesson to the next generation. It wasn't the ending Catherine had imagined when she walked into that museum 4 years ago. It was better. Because it wasn't really an ending at all. It was a beginning.